Okay, so Nicaragua, after months of nobody giving a shit about it, suddenly there are some people who care about it. The only problem is that those are people who are basically saying, we don't care about the fact that when it comes to us, censorship is wrong, muzzling the free press is wrong, going and controlling the people's thoughts and their access to different modes of communication is wrong. But in Nicaragua, it's okay because they're trying to put down a coup. No, it doesn't. Look, in my last video, I did criticize all those people who were saying, oh, how dare you attack John McCain or whatever. He's a true American hero. Well, the pendulum has to swing the other way as well. Because Nicaragua is a country, it happens to be the poorest country in all of Central America. It might be in all of Latin America. Probably one of the few countries that is poorer than Nicaragua in the Western Hemisphere is Haiti. And, you know, they have Daniel Ortega at the top, who has basically, he has eliminated all separation of powers, basically turned himself into a virtual dictator. So what do people on the left do instead of standing up for their own principles, which is, yes, delegation? I thought it would be, you know, after all these times when they claim this time it's going to work differently, this time it's not going to be a dictatorship, this time you're not going to get police basically beating the fuck out of people and detaining them without trial. How many times have they said, well, it's going to be different next time? What do they do here? This is a person who is an old line Marxist of the Cold War era. He's not a new socialist of any type. He's the same old brand of socialism from the Cold War. Daniel Ortega. And instead of saying, well, no, this isn't the change that we were talking about. We want something that is, we want somebody who's basically going to stay close to the principles of communal cooperation at the lowest level possible. That's not what's happening in Nicaragua. Instead, the quote-unquote anti-war left, the libertarian left, they try to call themselves, which this is not libertarianism, if this is what they're asking. Even civil libertarianism, which people kind of conflate with economic libertarianism. This is not civil libertarianism at all. They're basically trying to make it look like the government is fighting against this pernicious plot manufactured by the CIA that has absolutely no cause whatsoever. And they're trying to make it seem like everything just happened recently. Well, let's take a look at Lee Camp talking about it. By the way, there were a number of other people who this past weeks just started automatically just talking about Nicaragua out of nowhere. Max Blumenthal for The Real News, another douche. Basically, The Real News is a propaganda outlet for Venezuela, which by connection is with Nicaragua because their media conglomerate, TeleSUR, is owned by both countries and a few other countries within the ALBA bloc. So there was Max Blumenthal. Of course, there was Lee Camp here. And Jamarl Thomas actually made a reaction video after several months after I needled him over, you don't care about Nicaragua, which he doesn't. He suddenly made a video where he said, oh, you know, what's happening in Nicaragua, you can't trust America to have the true story here. I'm not telling you to trust America, Jamarl. I'm telling you to at least stay consistent with the fact that if you don't like police beating the shit out of protesters, then you might as well be consistent across the board. Because if it was happening here, you'd probably strongly object.
Like Monsanto and genetically modified peas and carrots. They do. It's actually nice because the GMO peas and carrots can actually hold hands. It's really, it's adorable. You're like, you belong together. Of course, if you've been watching the corporate media, you've heard nothing about Nicaragua or really any US-backed anything. For example, there's a US-backed genocide going on in Yemen right now, and as a recent Fairness and Accuracy in Reporting study made clear, over the past year on MSNBC, there have been 0 stories about Yemen, while there have been 455 stories about the porn star our president pooned. Which is like 445 too many, I feel like. Even if you're really into presidential erotic fan fiction, that's still 400 too many. That's still... Anyway, back to Latin America. The U.S. has had a long policy of undermining, infiltrating, and destroying any Latin American government that doesn't line up with U.S. policies. Meaning, if they're not down for neoliberal, pro-war, pro-oil economy, if a leader says...
Look what he basically mentioned all of them in this, intentionally probably. All of the usual far-left talking points on Latin America. Neoliberal, pro-war, pro-oil. Look, the country that's most pro-oil in Latin America would be Venezuela. I mean, they just destroyed the rest of their economy so that they could be dependent on oil. And now they can't even get oil out of the ground because they're just too incompetent to run their oil companies. Or oil company, PDVSA. So who's being the more pro-oil person here? Who's saber-rattling in Latin America against Guyana? It's not the United States, it's Venezuela over some territorial claim or whatever. Which, who knows if they'll ever go to war over it, but still. This is Lee Camp showing MSNBC, which is not even the network of most Americans. MSNBC is much less popular than Fox News Network. And I say this as somebody who doesn't watch Fox News or MSNBC. I probably see more segments of MSNBC than Fox News. Because Fox News is frankly boring and full of just stuffed shirt losers. Lee Camp should know that Fox News has covered some of the events in Latin America. So why does he only show the MSNBC issue over there? Well, yeah, he's correct that they're not covering Yemen. They're not covering Nicaragua because they are over-focused on President Trump. But look, everybody, all these media companies are way too focused on Trump. In fact, Lee Camp's show is probably to some degree better than other shows on it. But he talks about Trump pretty frequently. Who else is more varied than MSNBC in their news coverage? How about Bold Like a Leopard? I mean, I'll brag about this. I don't talk about Trump. There's a lot of weeks where I won't issue a Trump video, and there's people who will ask me, what about this regarding Trump or whatever. Yeah, I mean, there's not a ton of people who ask me this in the context of the videos or whatever, and I'm like, I don't have to talk about him all the time like everybody else. So Lee Camp is just being dissembling here. He's trying to make it seem like this is some sort of incident where it's the U.S. being the aggressor in Latin America. Let's see a little more of what he has to say, and then we'll move on.
Hey, let's live a different way where everyone's taken care of and we help each other out. Then the U.S. will make sure they end up wearing cement shoes at the bottom of a lake somewhere. And those cement shoes won't even be laid by union cement workers because all the unions have been destroyed. So you got like freelance, underpaid children cement workers making the shoes.
Okay, I want to say something. I was looking through this a little earlier. So he wants to talk about free, taking care of people or whatever. This is from the Times of India. Okay, this is not from Western media. This is from the Times of India, which is actually, I think the Times of India is actually a left-wing style Indian paper. And it says right here, 8 Nicaraguan doctors say they were fired for this from July. So that there have been more of these incidents since then. They say they were fired for treating hurt protesters. 8 public hospital doctors in Nicaragua. Fuck this. Fuck these notifications. That they have been fired after violating alleged orders not to treat wounded protesters opposing President Daniel Ortega's government. So is that the healthcare that Lee Camp is asking for? Because I thought it meant that you would get healthcare no matter what. The Associated Press saw several of the dismissal letters signed by the director of the Oscar Danilo Rosales Arguello Hospital in the western city of León. and they did not specify a cause. But Javier Pastor Membrano, who was head of surgery and endoscopy for the hospital before he was among those let go, said that our crime is having tended to the wounded from the protests or having supported the marches in some way, asking for justice, freedom, and a real democracy. So no, this is not about the economic system at all. It maybe to some degree, but what's happened is that the socialism that people have said is happening in Nicaragua is not even close to being one that helps the public. In fact, you could say that he's sold out. Ortega has sold out the very socialist ideals that many of these people like Lee Camp promote. He was very cozy with the business sector in Nicaragua for many years since he was reelected. And he was very cozy with the Catholic Church, and what ended up happening? He basically mortgaged his country to China in the form of a canal they were going to build through the middle of the country, okay, through people's lands. And then another thing that he ended up doing was to bring his country, under the dependence of Venezuelan oil. And as we all know now, that's gone. There's nothing for him to get as a subsidy in order to prop up his fragile economy. And Nicaragua, as I said at the beginning, is still the poorest country in Central America, one of the poorest countries in all of Latin America in the Western Hemisphere. So what have they really gained from having Ortega as the leader? So they can fly their more socialist flag around. That doesn't translate into people having more food to eat, Lee Camp.
It's probably part of the gig economy where you have some sort of cement shoe app on your phone that tricks cement layers into working for pennies because they don't understand the algorithm is fucking them hard. It's fucking them hard. And they don't even know. So it's not even quality cement shoe craftsmanship. It's shoddy, underpaid cement shoe work. Anyway, Nicaragua.
You look at this photo here. These are the people that he claims are the mercenaries, and that is an improvised mortar over there. Do you think that really is an effective tool to fight against an organized force?
Nicaragua is the latest U.S.-backed attempted coup. So I thought this would be a good time to take a moment and give you how to create a U.S.-backed government coup. Yeah. And you can play along at
So think about how to create a U.S.-backed government coup. But that's not a government coup. What does a government coup mean? Step back for a second. This is actually Lee Camp lying. And I don't like to, I don't watch Lee Camp that often. And I actually enjoy some of his shows. And I have no problem with RT. I have no problem with Lee Camp, usually. And I do disagree with him heavily here. And I'd say in this case he's lying. Because to call it a government coup would imply that the actual military or other sectors of the government have been behind removing Ortega. Okay, because it doesn't say the U.S. government. It says U.S.-backed government coup. What has happened in several of these countries is that, for example, I believe it was either in Bolivia or Paraguay, Alfredo Stroessner, who was a right-wing dictator, was overthrown in the late 80s because the U.S. government was looking at him. They said, this guy is such an eyesore to the reputation of the country that we need him out. So they had somebody else in the government just remove him from power. This has happened several times in right-wing dictatorships in Latin America. In Argentina, it used to happen every so often. I believe it was Roberto Viola was overthrown in the late 70s by Jorge Videla and the rest of the Chilean military junta. So it was one right-wing dictator overthrown by another. That was a government coup. Somebody from within. Pinochet, Augusto Pinochet. One of the people who watches my channel has Augusto Pinochet as his screen name. Augusto Pinochet was a general. He was the chief of, I think it was either the chief of staff or the defense minister under Salvador Allende. And he basically overthrew Allende in an internal plot that brought him to power. That is what a government coup is. It has nothing. So people protesting in the streets and throwing rocks at the police and firing improvised mortars at them, that is not the same thing. You can call it a coup all you want, but it's not the same thing. In fact, this is the type of thing that usually, when it comes to overthrowing right-wing regimes, they call a revolution. So when it's your ideals that are fighting in the streets, it's a revolution. When it's your ideals that are putting down people in the streets and basically forcing them to migrate over the border or firing doctors for treating them, that's a coup. I don't understand where the logic is.
At home, especially if your home is in Nicaragua or Venezuela. Step 1, create a strong US-backed fifth column. A fifth column is, you should know, I mean, how do you not know, is a group of people who undermine the government of a country in support of the enemy. They can be both covert and...
It's frozen on me, so I'm going to reload this.
Especially if your home is in Nicaragua or Venezuela. Step 1, create a strong US-backed fifth column. A fifth column is, you should know, I mean, how do you not know, is a group of people who undermine the government of a country in support of the enemy. They can be both covert and open. And I can't believe you don't know this. This is the part of the show where I pretend to know something that I just learned 2 days ago. And I make you feel really dumb. I can't believe you didn't know about it.
That's probably true, though. You probably did just learn about this.
There are various ways to create fifth columns. We here in the US like to create ours using a good, wholesome front. Nonprofit organizations. Our two favorites are USAID and the National Endowment for Democracy, NED. What is the NED? Well, as editor of Consortium News Robert Perry put it, in 1983, NED essentially took over the CIA's role of influencing electoral outcomes. Because who has the time, right? And destabilizing governments that got in the way of US interests. Except that NED carried out those functions in a quasi-overt fashion, while the CIA did them covertly. NED also serves as a sort of slush fund for neocons. Now, I don't know about you, but when I picture a neocon slush fund, I picture like Dick Cheney, Mitch McConnell, and Bill Kristol naked in a small bathtub filled with the vomit of all their victims. Is that, I mean, I know.
Yeah, it's a horrible image, but it's still not relevant to what we're talking about. So the National Endowment for Democracy, I believe they put $4 million into funding quote-unquote democratic groups in Nicaragua. They probably were involved in some of the same types of groups in Venezuela. And I've stated before when talking about this, and some of the people bring this up, they don't even, they talk about the CIA doing this. And then I do tell them it is the National Endowment for Democracy. And they are full of crap, and I do oppose what they're doing. But it does not mean that if there was no NED, that there would be just harmony and peace in Nicaragua. Because after all, like I said, they basically mortgaged the country to China in order to build a canal that never got built. So everybody dances around that topic. Jamarl, I actually asked him directly about it in the chat on Friday because I couldn't call him and he probably wouldn't take my call anymore. He also, they won't address the fact that China was trying to build a canal across Nicaragua through people's land. And that is not okay with some people there, particularly the people that own the land that the canal would go through. Because it would be, you know, they don't get anything for it. And basically, also imported Chinese labor builds the canal. That's not Nicaraguan. Mr. Union here doesn't care about that. So these people, they love blaming all of Latin America's problems on the United States. And they don't realize that somebody like Daniel Ortega is the president of an independent state. And just like any president of an independent state, he should be forced to be accountable for the things that he does in leading his country. Okay, now, maybe we can't hold him accountable, but the people of Nicaragua are you know, protesting in the streets and getting beaten by the cops and hunted down and then forced to cross over the border and leave, then I would say that that's them attempting to keep him accountable. That's not what a coup is. Let's switch gears for a second. I don't think we're going to come back to this, but you're welcome to. I did post this in the description, so you can check out all of Lee Camp's video. And in general, you can check out his show. I think his show sometimes has some good stuff. This University of Texas at Austin's Knight Center for Journalism in the Americas, it says, manager of Canal Diez in Nicaragua seeks refuge in the Honduran embassy amid allegations of persecution against the channel. So it says, news that Carlos Pastora, general manager of Canal Diez of Nicaragua, sought refuge in the Honduran embassy in Managua, awoke rumors of alleged persecution by the government of Daniel Ortega against the channel. So this guy who owns a TV channel in Nicaragua is basically hiding out because they're going to basically detain him and his family because he tried to leave the country. How there's this idea, love it or leave it. Well, he was trying to leave it and they wouldn't let him. So they won't even let opposition members leave the country anymore. So Pastora's decision was allegedly made after August 21st when he was about to travel to Miami on business, and immigration agents denied his departure, stating that he had an immigration restriction, La Prensa reported. So La Prensa is the main opposition newspaper in Nicaragua. Pastora, who also has Honduran nationality, sought help from the country out of fear he was in danger, as he announced on August 23rd in a letter sent by Pastora to the National Commissioner for Human Rights of Honduras, Roberto Herrera Caceres. He asked for protection for himself and his family. Now I'm not going to beat around the bush. I think Honduras also has a bad human rights record under Jorge Hernandez, I think his name is, or Juan Hernandez. I don't remember what the name of their leader is, but Honduras isn't a great country either in terms of human rights. My human rights are being violated by a government, and my family and I fear for our lives. Denouncing that we could be killed and calling on the authorities of my country to help us immediately, Pastora wrote in the letter that was read by presenters at Canal Diez. Pastora's statements have revived allegations that the Ortega government is persecuting Canal Diez. A report by Confidential said that Acción Diez, a news program on the channel with the biggest audience in the country, has covered the protests that have been carried out against the government since April, as well as the brutal repression of these civilian protesters. Due to this coverage, Canal Diez journalists have been harassed by alleged paramilitary groups, and their chief of information has also suffered harassment and threats, Confidencial reported. The alleged persecution would have increased after Mexican businessman Angel Gonzalez refused to sell the channel to the government. According to Confidencial, Gonzalez, who created his media empire in most Central American countries, controls half of a channel duopoly in Nicaragua alongside the presidential family, including children and business leaders close to the Ortega administration. So I'd like to say this, okay? Well, you have a problem here where there's not a lot of media in Latin America to begin with that's visible to everybody. But I'd say it is strange that Nicaragua has only two main channels, one of which is owned by this Mexican oligarch, basically, and the other one by the presidential family. So it's corrupt either way. You can't have a collective media that's completely controlled by political interests, whether it's for the government or against the government. I think you have to have a good variety, a good spectrum of people. And I would hope that, every country would have just a good assortment of different media enterprises. It's good in the U.S. You have Reason Magazine. Reason Magazine, they drive me crazy half of the time, and the other half of the time I like what they put in. You see Jimmy Dore. His show drives me crazy. Sometimes a lot of great points. Other times you have to take the bitter with the sweet. And but in this case in Nicaragua, they are censoring an opposition website. There's no other way to look at it. Last Monday, August 20th, Oscar Ortiz, head of information for the official Canal 8, arrived at the facilities of Canal 10, assuring that he would be in charge of the channel's news program, La Prensa and Canal 10 reported. Although he said that he had been sent by Pastora, the workers removed him from the place and assured that they would not allow a change of editorial line at their media outlet, which the Canal 8 employee indicated would focus on social themes and no longer touch on political issues, according to Confidencial. So this is so Lee Camp wants to pretend, oh, I'm Mr. I defend Latin America from American imperialism. Well, no, you're actually defending the abridgment of civil rights in that country. Okay, and that's not going to help Nicaragua. I wouldn't say that we should. I have been consistent in saying we don't have a need to intervene in Latin America. Now, here's an article from TeleSUR, which, by the way, has been censored wrongly by, I believe it was Facebook, and I don't know if YouTube did as well, where they basically play up. This is on August 25th, so yesterday, Nicaragua's tourism industry, and they say, how do you feel about activity in Nicaragua's tourist sector at the moment? What's your main focus? And Anasha Campbell, who is the director of the Tourism Institute, says, we are very confident, we are positive, and we are passionate about this sector, about the development of tourism in Nicaragua. For us, tourism, more than the numbers in terms of tourists arriving, in terms of income, for us, tourism is a strategy for the human development of Nicaragua's people. What the fuck does that even mean? Our main focus right now is strengthening our promotional strategy to regain that influx of international arrivals, but also getting out the information that our tourism infrastructure, our cultural, and also our natural patrimony are intact. We are working with this new campaign, Nicaragua is as beautiful as ever, focusing on the natural beauty of our country with more than 72 protected areas that are not bulldozed by a canal yet. About 20% of our territory being protected areas, but also our national reserves with 7% of the world's biodiversity and the volcanoes this country has to offer. Nicaragua has this uniqueness of offering different activities in a small. So they're basically, TeleSUR is putting an infomercial up for Nicaraguan tourism while the country is undergoing this massive upheaval. This country has a unique offering as a new destination, combining nature with culture. You get great satisfaction for less investment compared with other parts of the world. So you're saying great satisfaction for less investment. Doesn't that sound like it's cheaper? Like it costs less to pay people in Nicaragua than in other countries. Like basically you're selling your country's cheap, affordable lifestyle to outsiders because they can come in and give you money and you have to pay your own people less. Doesn't that sound a bit like basically people selling out their country? Does Lee Camp actually read to what TeleSUR publishes about? Because TeleSUR is 5% owned by the Nicaraguan government. So he should probably pay attention to that. Does tourism have a role helping democratize Nicaragua's economy, for example, via the inclusion of the country's Caribbean coast? So Nasha says in Nicaragua, tourism is based on SMEs, small and medium enterprises. 80% of the tourist industry is based on these SMEs, and the democratization of that investment means it goes directly to the Nicaraguan people. It does not go to big capital that probably exports those gains from this sector. It is based on SMEs, which means that the Nicaraguan people, Nicaraguan families, are the ones who are offering their services and products in the tourism industry. That is why I mentioned before that for us, tourism is seen as the strategy for the human development of the Nicaraguan people. From 2015 until now, tourism has been the main income-generating sector for the Nicaraguan economy in general. That means work for the Nicaraguan people, but it also means Nicaragua's people have seen the sector as a means to generate income, both to develop their families and to develop their community. So I think this is actually factually a complete lie, and I'll tell you why. So let's see if I can find this. It's going to take a couple minutes, so bear with me. So you can see most of public debt. I think I know how to find this. Just had it too. Okay. This should be it. So these are the exports. Okay, knit t-shirts, knit sweaters, insulated wire. Good to know that. Crustaceans, bovine. So this is the majority of what they export. And let's see if we can get down here. Sorry if we're using Wikipedia today, but what are you going to do? You have... Oh, no. It says Nicaragua is primarily an agricultural country, but construction. So agriculture is not tourism. In the last 12 years, though, tourism has grown 394%. The rapid growth has led it to become Nicaragua's second largest source of foreign capital. Less than 3 years ago, the nation's tourism budget was $400,000. Today it is over $2 million. So that's not that big of a tourism budget, $2 million. So that's not really an accurate statement on the part of this person talking to TeleSUR. So let me see. This is... We have Eden Pastora, who is a Nicaraguan former Sandinista. I guess he's back to being a Sandinista. And he basically says the crisis of Venezuela is because of right-wing coup agitators, warns the Sandinista Eden Pastora. Now, Pastora was he was also, well, you'll see in a second. It says Eden Pastora came to world fame as Comandante Zero, that means Commander Zero, on August 22nd, 1978, when he led the occupation of the National Palace of Managua. That was the Nicaraguan parliament. In this operation, his commandos confronted the troops of the Anastasio Somoza Debayle regime, and they took 3,000 hostages and accomplished, after 24 hours, the release of 69 political prisoners. Four decades later, after contributing to the fall of the Sandinista regime, Pastora says in an interview with El Universal, which is from Mexico City, that the conflict which is going on in Nicaragua today, which has the country sunk into the most grave and mortal crisis of the 21st century, is provoked by terrorists and coup agitators, opposition right-wingers that have murdered and wounded police, attacked buildings, and burned down radio stations and city halls, and caused multiple socioeconomic and institutional stresses. So essentially he's saying everything that I did in the 70s, they're doing today, but when they do it, it's terrorism, and when I did it, it was okay. That's essentially what he's saying. You know, because this person, if he had any integrity left, he would realize that the same thing that he did to a different government can be done to his own, the one that he supports. He also warns, in reference to the U.S., that the empire is bothered when we revolutionaries do a revolution with health plans, education, sustenance, I guess government sustenance and security for the majority of Nicaraguans, and he also says for some reason that Nicaragua is not a priority for the empire. Then why would they be investing in overthrowing the government? You can't have it both ways. Born on January 22nd, 1937 in Ciudad Dario in the north central. So this is just saying his biography. So they're going through this. He recognizes that he has 21 children from 4 marriages and 6 affairs. This man fought Somoza and also later rose up in arms from 1982 to 86 against the government, the leftist government of the Sandinista National Liberation Front, FSLN, led by Daniel Ortega, with whom he reconciled in 2007 when he came back to power. So Comandante Cerro, Eden Pastora, has basically this is what I don't understand. You have these people claiming that this is another Contra attack and an invasion and a coup and whatever. You have a Contra basically supporting. This was a U.S.-backed Contra supporting Ortega now. So what are you trying to do? Pretend that this is still the 1980s? Ortega is not the socialist icon that you thought that he was. Okay, and even if he was, he'd still be fucking it all up, because the people of Nicaragua are still just as poor as 11 years ago when he came to power. It's still a dump of a country nowadays. And I'm tired of people trying to rationalize everything just because they cosmetically have some sort of flag that evokes popular revolution and whatever. The popular revolution is over with respect to being Sandinistas. Okay, the man, Ortega, is, I think, in his 70s or 80s now. So you want to just keep having the same old, tired revolutionary in power, and that's what you call a revolution? That's basically what has happened in Cuba. And now in Cuba, it's now almost, it would essentially be a third generation of a revolution that's kept the country poor. So I'm not going to let these people get off the hook. I'm going to continue talking about Nicaragua, Venezuela, and all of these other cesspools of left-wing phonyism, where they think that their whole principle is, we're going to keep imperialism off of Latin America, even if it means putting people into crippling poverty and starvation. It's more important for us to fight the Yankee imperialista. That's what they think is more important than to actually have their people live in a more dignified and sustainable way, in a way that they can live and eat and have their kids go to school safely and have a proper education and not have to worry about starvation and disease and a lack of basic services. So that's about it. I want you guys to watch the video again. If you missed some of it, please comment in the description, in the comment section after it uploads. Share the video, subscribe to the channel, and like the video as well. And I'll talk to you later.